Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you've believed about control, power, and the self was only a shadow, a thin veil covering something far more powerful within you. What if I told you that just 7 days, merely 1 week, of abstaining from compulsive pleasure can begin to tear down that veil? And what if after 180 days, the man who stands before the mirror no longer recognizes the one who stood there before? There is a transformation that modern man rarely speaks of, for it exists in the realm of silence, shadow, and internal war. But beneath the surface, it is a deep psychological confrontation with the darkest, most unconscious parts of the self. In the first 7 days, the ego begins to stir. The man feels withdrawal not only from the habit, but from the false identity it has built around him. You see, our compulsions are not merely behaviors, they are manifestations of inner chaos, and when we deny them, we awaken the unconscious. At first, the experience is disorienting. The body screams for dopamine. The mind tries to bargain. The shadow, what I described as the repressed, unknown aspects of the psyche, begins to rise. One might feel more anxious, more irritable, even more lost than before. But this is not regression. This is the soul stretching its arms after a lifetime of slumber. The discomfort is the cost of confronting the self. After 7 days, something peculiar happens. Your eyes start to see differently. Not the world outside, but the one within. Energy, once squandered, begins to accumulate. You speak more directly. You walk more firmly. And not because of some mystical force, but because your psyche is reclaiming its sovereignty. The animus, the inner masculine, reclaims its throne. By 30 days, the war with the shadow becomes a dialogue. And if you are courageous enough to sit with it, not run from it, not suppress it, you begin to integrate. You begin to heal. Sexual energy, once misused, now seeks purpose. This is not about repression. It is about transmutation. Libido, which Freud called the force of life itself, is no longer wasted in fantasies and isolation, but redirected toward creation, connection, and clarity. By 90 days, your identity is no longer craving. You begin to embody presence. Women notice. Men respect. Not because you sought it, but because energy speaks before words. You are becoming whole, not perfect, but integrated. And at 180 days, the transformation becomes archetypal. You are no longer merely avoiding a behavior. You are embodying a new mythos. You have stepped into the role of the alchemist, transmuting the base instinct into higher purpose. You have faced the dragon, not to slay it, but to ride it. But understand this, the journey is not linear. The old self will claw its way back through dreams, temptation, and subtle sabotage. This is the nature of the unconscious. It resists change. Yet every day you resist regression is a day you feed the higher self, the true you beneath the masks. Modern society thrives on your weakness. Algorithms, entertainment, and industry all seduce your primal instincts. You are told to indulge, to escape, to numb. But the path of individuation, the path to becoming who you are meant to be, demands resistance, solitude, and vision. In NoFap, the true battle is not against lust. It is against fragmentation, against disintegration of the psyche. Against the passive death of the soul. The man who walks 7 days feels the tremor. The man who walks 180 days becomes the earthquake. And once you feel that power, raw, unfiltered, sacred, you will understand it was never about abstinence. It was always about becoming whole. There exists in every man a raw, untamed energy, a force as ancient as the psyche itself. Jung called it libido, not merely as sexual desire, but as the fundamental psychic energy that drives all aspects of life. Ambition, creativity, love, aggression, transformation. In our age, this force is misdirected, consumed by screens, spilled in secrecy, and traded for fleeting pleasure. What was once sacred has become compulsive. Addiction replaces initiation. The masculine soul is quietly collapsing beneath the weight of its own unspent power. When a man commits to NoFap, even for 7 days, he is not merely resisting a habit. He is damming a river that has flooded into unconscious terrain. The urge rises, and with it, discomfort. But discomfort is not the enemy. It is the signal that something deeper is being stirred. Libido, once leaked, begins to accumulate. The system, nervous, emotional, psychological, shifts. The same energy that once drove indulgence now demands a new channel. This is where the transformation begins. In the early days, it feels like withdrawal, but in truth, it is recalibration. The psyche begins sorting itself. A man notices he walks differently, speaks with more clarity, holds eye contact longer. This isn't magic. It's nature, uninterrupted, unpolluted nature. He becomes slightly more attuned to his environment, more present. There is no longer a dopamine haze fogging perception. Thoughts sharpen, sleep deepens, the eyes clear. Energy, actual, noticeable energy, returns to the body. Jung believed that all true growth requires confrontation with the unconscious. Porn, compulsive pleasure, and emotional numbing act as distractions from that confrontation. In denying these patterns, the unconscious rises, not to destroy, but to be seen. The libido, instead of being scattered across 100 false pleasures, begins to seek purpose. It is the alchemical process, transforming lead into gold, base instinct into higher meaning. Nowhere is this more obvious than in the sudden bursts of creative clarity a man begins to feel. Ideas return. Projects once abandoned resurface. The desire to build, lead, move, and express grows stronger. Sexual energy, denied expression in the physical, is rechanneled into the symbolic, the artistic, the intellectual. This is not suppression, it is redirection, and it is ancient. Monks knew it. Warriors practiced it. Visionaries thrived on it. Yet this path is not easy. The inner addict resists. He whispers seduction in quiet moments. He justifies, rationalizes, bargains. But with each denial, the man grows stronger, not in repression, but in awareness. He begins to see clearly what once controlled him. He reclaims choice. The more libido is conserved, the more it intensifies. But this is not dangerous. It is potential. The body may tremble. The dreams may become vivid. The emotions may surface. But beneath the chaos lies transformation. The libido, having been freed from the chains of addiction, seeks new life. It urges the man toward growth, expansion, conquest, not of others but of self. The first 7 days of NoFap are not a challenge of willpower. They are a descent into the neglected corridors of the unconscious. Most men, when they begin this journey, believe they are simply avoiding a bad habit. They soon discover that what they are truly facing is a long-buried part of themselves, the shadow. This is not metaphor. It is Jungian truth. The shadow is not evil in itself, but it is everything you have rejected, repressed, and hidden, especially your instincts, urges, and unresolved wounds. And when you strip away your primary coping mechanism, compulsive pleasure, those things do not disappear. They surface. Within hours of abstaining, a silent war begins. The ego, which has grown comfortable with short-term rewards and avoidance, is confronted by a strange absence. The usual escape is gone. The dopamine spike is missing. The psyche panics. Anxiety creeps in. Thoughts become intrusive. Emotions, long kept in check by the numbing effects of constant stimulation, surge with unusual force. But this chaos is not dysfunction. It is confrontation. You are no longer running. You are finally sitting with the parts of yourself that you've spent years avoiding. This psychological discomfort is the shadow's awakening. In the beginning, it appears subtly. Old memories arise, regrets long buried resurface. You might feel irritation for no reason, sudden sadness, or bursts of inexplicable anger. These are not random. They are the signals of psychic material returning to the surface. The shadow is testing you, asking, will you finally face me, or will you flee again? Most men fail here. Not because they lack strength, but because they lack understanding. They mistake this discomfort for failure, when in fact it is the very proof that the process has begun. When you deny the habitual outlet for pain and frustration, porn, masturbation, distraction, the pain itself remains. It demands to be seen, and it comes not as a whisper, but as a roar. Sleep is disturbed. Dreams become intense, often sexual, sometimes disturbing. This is no coincidence. Jung believed the unconscious speaks through symbols, and during this initial phase, the psyche uses dreams to express what can no longer be numbed during waking hours. Fantasies appear with new vividness, not because you are weaker, but because the unconscious is louder now. It is closer to the surface than it has ever been. In this phase, temptation is not physical, it is psychological. The mind becomes the battlefield. Rationalizations whisper, just once. You've earned it, and no one will know. These voices are not your thoughts. They are fragments of the ego in revolt. They are the parts of you still bound to the old identity, the identity that relies on indulgence to survive. And here lies the true war, not between you and your urges, but between your evolving self and the version of you that refuses to die. There is something almost sacred about the suffering of these first 7 days, not because suffering itself is noble, but because it purifies. In this furnace of discomfort, the man sees what he truly is, not what he shows the world, not what he posts, not what he pretends to be, but the raw, unfiltered contents of his psyche, his loneliness, his fear, his rage, his longing. This confrontation, though brutal, is necessary. The shadow must be seen before it can be integrated. It is here that power begins to flicker. Not power over others, but power over self. The recognition that you are not your urges, that your compulsions do not define you, that you can feel an impulse without obeying it, that you can suffer and still remain still. In Jungian terms, this is the first step toward individuation, the forging of a whole psyche, where nothing is denied but everything is seen, known, and eventually transformed. This is not a week of abstinence. It is a rite of passage. A test of whether the man is ready to meet himself without illusion, to look into the mirror of his own chaos and not turn away, to allow the shadow to rise, not to be vanquished, but to be understood. To reach 180 days of NoFap is not simply to abstain, it is to ascend. It is not a streak, not a number, not a trophy. It is the emergence of a new psychic order. The compulsions have quieted, the chaos of the unconscious has begun to settle, and what rises from this silence is something ancient, something forgotten in modern men, the archetype of the king. But this king is not a costume. He is not an egoic fantasy of domination or status. He is the fully integrated masculine self, rooted in discipline, clarity, purpose, and inner stability. This is not a role one plays. It is a state one becomes. After 180 days, the man has endured the temptations, the self-sabotage, the internal betrayal. He has seen the worst of himself and not run. And through that fire, he has forged authority, not over others, but over his own psyche. He no longer seeks validation through pleasure. His energy is no longer scattered. Libido, which once leaked out in secrecy and shame, has become focused, sharp, almost weaponized in its intensity. But it is not destructive, it is generative. He begins to carry a different presence, not loud, not performative, but centered, grounded, the kind of presence that enters a room and alters it without saying a word. Others may notice it without understanding why. It is not charisma, it is coherence. It is coherence. Inner alignment. When a man is no longer at war with himself, he radiates power not from effort but from wholeness. The inner king is not merely self-confident, he is self-possessed. Jung understood that the psyche thrives not through suppression, but through integration. The shadow has been met and partially embraced. The lover, once immature and impulsive, now serves the king. The warrior, once reckless, now protects boundaries. The magician, once fragmented, now offers vision and insight. These masculine archetypes begin to fall into alignment, not by chance, but by conscious effort over time. NoFap, sustained and deliberate, becomes the vessel through which these archetypes are activated and matured. Sexual desire, which once controlled the man, now serves a higher purpose. It no longer demands immediate gratification. It becomes a force of discernment, drawing him only toward depth, connection, and truth. He no longer seeks women to fill a void, to numb pain, or to prove worth. He seeks from abundance, not from hunger. He speaks less, but with more weight. He acts slower, but with more precision. He begins to move like a sovereign, aware, disciplined, and inwardly anchored. The emotional reactivity of earlier stages fades. Triggers weaken. The mind sharpens. He becomes less interested in arguing, more focused on building. Petty distractions lose their grip. Dopamine no longer rules the throne, vision does. The man begins to feel called, not to pleasure, but to purpose. His energy returns to its original state, creative, directional, assertive. His gaze is forward, his posture straightens. His words become law to himself. Yet the inner king is not perfect. He is not without flaws. But he no longer hides from them. He has confronted his own lust, his own fear, his own self-deception, and having faced them, he no longer fears what he sees in the mirror. He governs himself with firm compassion. He sets boundaries. He honors his word. He no longer begs the world to give him power. He generates it from within. He begins to understand that the body is sacred, not in a religious sense, but in a psychological one. It houses the force that creates life, and he now treats it as such. This is why the man at 180 days appears different, not because he has achieved something, but because he has become something. He has become something. He has become someone who can contain the full charge of his own energy without collapse. Someone who no longer divides himself between craving and guilt, action and regret. He becomes the embodiment of masculine integration, not fractured, not compulsive, not lost, but whole. A man who controls his sexual urges is not just rare, he is dangerous. Not in the violent, chaotic sense that society likes to portray masculine danger, but in a deeper, quieter way. He cannot be manipulated. He cannot be sold to. He cannot be distracted. And in a world engineered to keep men in a state of constant craving and passivity, this kind of man becomes a threat to the entire system. The moment he breaks free from the pleasure prison, he steps outside the economic and psychological machinery that profits from his weakness. Look around. Entire industries, pornography, social media, entertainment, pharmaceuticals are built upon the foundation that the modern man is unable to govern himself. They feed off his dopamine. They demand that he remain in a cycle of click, consume, collapse, repeat. Because the man who is chasing pleasure is easy to predict. He stays online longer. He buys things he doesn't need. He seeks validation instead of truth. He is endlessly available, endlessly distracted, endlessly hungry. But NoFap, practiced seriously, severs that cycle. In the first few weeks, the man begins to notice just how deeply the world has been conditioning his instincts. He becomes aware of how sexualized every ad, every algorithm, every conversation has become. Not because sex is inherently wrong, but because it's being used against him. His most primal energy, his libido, is being hijacked and weaponized to keep him dependent and docile. It's not a conspiracy. It's commerce. It's commerce. When a man stops giving his attention to artificial pleasure, he reclaims his inner world, and that makes him unpredictable. He no longer clicks what he's told to click. He no longer believes that his worth is tied to likes, follows, or sexual conquests. He begins to create rather than consume. He begins to think rather than react. He begins to move toward long-term purpose rather than short-term stimulation. This is not the man society wants. A man who thinks deeply, acts intentionally, and lives without addiction is a man who no longer fits into the mold. He doesn't respond to fear-based messaging. He doesn't seek validation from strangers. He becomes sovereign, not rebellious for the sake of rebellion, but inwardly free. And this freedom, this psychological independence, is the real reason NoFap is not simply discouraged, it is ridiculed. Mockery is the most effective tool to suppress dangerous ideas, so the man who chooses abstinence is labeled insecure, repressed, toxic, extreme. He is told he's overthinking, that it's natural, that it's healthy, that self-control is unnecessary. But beneath that narrative lies fear, fear that too many men might wake up, that they might begin to question the very system that thrives on their distraction. Because when enough men unplug from artificial stimulation, they begin to feel something they haven't felt in years: focus. Focus is terrifying to systems of control. A focused man reads, he trains, he builds, he questions, he grows. He becomes a threat not through violence, but through vision, because vision disrupts systems. It builds new ones. A man who no longer lives in servitude to his impulses becomes a builder of culture, not a consumer of it. Even relationships change. He no longer pursues women with the desperation of uncontained lust. He sees clearly who adds value to his path and who drains it. He stops playing games. His standards rise not out of arrogance, but because he has finally discovered his own worth outside of pleasure. He is no longer begging to be chosen. He is choosing. And that kind of man cannot be bought, broken, or seduced. There comes a point in a man's life when he must stop asking what the world wants of him and begin asking what the self is calling him to become. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the path toward wholeness, where the fragmented parts of the psyche are brought into unity. Unity. NoFap, when approached not merely as a physical abstinence, but as a psychological practice, becomes a vehicle for this transformation. It begins not with discipline, but with awakening, the realization that the habitual behaviors we often justify or ignore are, in fact, the very chains that keep us from becoming ourselves. The compulsive use of pornography and masturbation is not just a symptom of lust, it is the symbolic expression of disconnection. From purpose, from emotion, from depth, from the authentic self. From the authentic self. In Jungian terms, it is a split in the psyche. the ego's attempt to satisfy its hunger through simulation rather than integration. The man who chooses NoFap is not merely giving something up. He is initiating a psychic reordering.